What would you do if the very people sworn to protect your community's values decided that your family didn't belong? 5 years ago, I moved into this neighborhood believing it was a place where my son could thrive. It wasn't just about the house or the tree-lined streets, it was about the promise of an inclusive community, a place where a wheelchair wasn't a barrier but just another mode of transportation. I had made a promise to my late wife when we laid her to rest: our son Jacob would not just survive, but thrive. Jacob is 15 now, a brilliant mind with a talent for science, already on track for a scholarship despite the physical challenges that come with his condition. Every morning, our routine is carefully timed: 5:30 a.m. medication, therapy exercises, getting him dressed and into his chair, ensuring everything runs smoothly before the bus arrives at precisely 7:15. It's a system we've perfected over the years, allowing him to maintain his independence and his dignity. But none of that mattered to Barbara Williams, our neighborhood's self-proclaimed queen and HOA president. A retired executive with political aspirations, Barbara had transformed what should have been a simple homeowners association into her own personal empire. She wasn't interested in building a community, she was crafting a campaign backdrop. Her first moves were subtle: anonymous notes about community aesthetics left in my mailbox, nitpicking over the shade of green in our lawn, the position of our trash cans, and the fact that our mailbox was half an inch too high. Annoying, but nothing we couldn't ignore. Then came the real agenda. Neighbors whispered about Barbara's unspoken policies, complaints about families who didn't fit the image she wanted to project. I didn't think much of it at first, until I overheard 2 board members at a neighborhood gathering mention those situations: families with ramps, modified vehicles, or anything that might disrupt Barbara's perfect community standards. I should have paid more attention. I should have realized that when people like Barbara talk about protecting the neighborhood, they aren't talking about safety. They're talking about keeping people like my son out of sight. That Monday morning felt like any other. I was double-checking Jacob's wheelchair, making sure the battery was charged, when I noticed the indicator light flashing red. Jacob pressed the joystick, but the chair barely responded. His face tensed, trying to mask the frustration I knew too well. He hated being late, especially for advanced chemistry, his favorite class. "Something's wrong," he called out, his voice tinged with worry. I knelt beside him, heart pounding, and quickly removed the control panel cover. A loose connection. Nothing serious, but enough to shut the chair down at the worst possible time. "Give me a second," I reassured him, working swiftly to reconnect the wiring. When the wheelchair finally hummed back to life, Jacob's relief was immediate. "You're a genius, Dad," he said with a grin. For a brief moment, everything felt normal again. But Barbara Williams had been watching. Across the street, her eyes bore into us from behind her oversized sunglasses, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. The sight of her sent a familiar unease crawling up my spine. She always seemed to be waiting, watching, documenting. Then, the unmistakable yellow school bus turned the corner. Right on schedule. Mr. Wilson, the ever-patient driver, gave his usual friendly wave. "Morning, Jacob. Ready for that chemistry test?" Jacob smiled and nodded as the bus's mechanical lift extended with a soft hum, but something was different today. A few students inside pressed their faces against the windows, their phones raised, recording. A sharp crack split the morning air, the sound of a door slamming. Barbara was marching toward us. Her tailored blazer flapped slightly as she strode across the street, her usually pristine composure cracking under the force of whatever righteous fury she had summoned today. Behind her, a younger man with a professional camera followed at a distance. I felt Jacob stiffen next to me. His hands gripped the wheels of his chair, his body tense. "Just breathe, buddy," I wanted to tell him. But my own pulse was hammering too fast. Barbara's voice sliced through the quiet like a blade. "Every single morning." The words dripped with exaggerated exasperation, loud enough for the entire bus to hear. She wanted an audience. Jacob's wheelchair was halfway up the lift and Barbara's perfectly manicured finger jabbed toward us. This disruption has gone on long enough. I forced myself to stay calm. "Good morning, Barbara," I said, guiding Jacob's chair up the ramp. "We'll just be another minute." "That's exactly the problem." She took another step forward, voice rising. "Every day, this entire street is blocked by this situation." The word situation hit like a slap. "Excuse me?" I asked, my grip tightening on Jacob's chair. Barbara glanced at the camera crew, her expression momentarily shifting, calculating, adjusting. Then she turned back to me, lowering her voice just enough for only me to hear. "Do you know how this looks to potential voters?" I blinked. "Voters? This neighborhood is my showcase of effective leadership," she hissed. "I can't have this," she gestured vaguely toward the lift, **** as a daily scene in my community, ***. A slow, sickening realization settled over me. This wasn't just HOA harassment. This was staged. Mr. Wilson, watching from the driver's seat, leaned out. "Ma'am, I'm on a schedule, but safety protocols require." "I know exactly who you work for," Barbara snapped. "Expect a call to your supervisor about these daily traffic violations." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the bus. The kids filming were no longer just amused spectators, they were witnesses. Jacob's hands trembled slightly on his wheelchair controls. "Dad," he whispered, barely audible. "I'm sorry I'm causing trouble." And that was what broke me. My son, who had done nothing wrong, was apologizing for existing. I turned to Barbara, voice tight. "My son has every right." She cut me off, flipping through a stack of papers on her clipboard. "I've documented 27 instances of street obstruction," she declared. "I'm filing formal complaints with the school district, the transportation department, and I'll be bringing this up at tonight's emergency HOA meeting." Then, she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to an insidious whisper. "Your son's situation doesn't fit the neighborhood image I need for my campaign." A nauseating silence stretched between us. I wanted to respond, to say something, to tear her apart with words, to shake her until she realized how cruel she was being, But the bus doors were already closing. Jacob was inside, staring at the floor, his posture hunched inward, as if he was trying to disappear. The bus pulled away. Barbara, smug and victorious, turned on her heel, already dialing a number on her phone. I stood frozen, my breath coming in shallow, uneven bursts. And then, from behind me, a quiet voice spoke. "That was absolutely disgraceful." I turned to see Eleanor Ellie Grant, standing at the edge of her porch, leaning on her cane. She had seen everything. My throat was still too tight to respond. "I've been documenting Barbara's behavior for weeks," Ellie said, holding up her phone. And so have a lot of other people, For the first time all morning, I felt something other than helpless fury. Hope. By the time I walked back into the house, my hands were still shaking. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me like a stone in my chest. Barbara had done many things before, passive-aggressive notes, petty fines, veiled threats, but this was different. This was an all-out attack. She wasn't just harassing us anymore. She was trying to erase my son from the neighborhood. I tossed my keys onto the kitchen counter and reached for the stack of mail sitting by the door. A thick white envelope caught my eye. The HOA logo was stamped in the top corner, its presence somehow more ominous than usual. I ripped it open and scanned the letter inside. My stomach dropped. An emergency HOA meeting had been scheduled for that night to discuss ongoing street obstruction violations and neighborhood presentation standards. Attached to the notice were photos, dozens of them, each meticulously dated and labeled. They showed Jacob's morning bus routine, his wheelchair ramp, even the bus itself. Some were taken from a distance, others uncomfortably close, almost invasive. Every single one was captioned with phrases like, public disruption, and, excessive delay. Barbara had been documenting us for weeks. My pulse pounded in my ears as my phone rang. I barely glanced at the screen before answering. "Mr. Thompson," said Principal Sarah Mitchell, her voice calm but edged with concern. "I wanted to give you a heads up. We've received multiple complaints about Jacob's transportation situation." I gripped the counter. "What does that mean?" "There's a push to have his specialized bus service reviewed. Someone is claiming it's causing unnecessary disruptions." I knew exactly who that someone was. "If this goes through," she continued carefully, "Jacob may be required to use the regular bus stop, 2 blocks away." The words hit me like a slap. 2 blocks away. Up a steep hill. No sidewalk. Impossible. "This isn't routine procedure," she admitted. "Someone with political connections is pushing this through unusually fast." My grip on the phone tightened. "Barbara." The principal hesitated. "I can't confirm that, but I thought you should know before the transportation committee meeting tomorrow." When I hung up, I found Jacob sitting in the hallway. He had heard everything. "Maybe I should just switch to online school," he said softly. "Then I won't be in anyone's way." The defeat in his voice snapped something inside me. "No," I said firmly. "We are not letting her do this to you." I picked up my phone and dialed Ellie Grant. Within an hour, my living room was filled with neighbors, people I had barely spoken to before today, all furious, all ready to fight. Ellie took charge naturally, her years as a civil rights attorney shining through as she laid out a plan. "This isn't just about Jacob," she said. "Barbara has been targeting families for months, anyone who doesn't fit her perfect community image. We need to prove that she's using her position not for the benefit of the neighborhood, but for her political campaign." Tom Whitaker, the quiet but meticulous neighbor from across the street, opened his laptop. "I've been tracking Barbara's HOA decisions for the past year. Every rule change, every violation, every approval, it all aligns with her political ambitions." He pulled up a spreadsheet, showing how she had strategically enforced regulations to drive out certain families while ignoring violations from her supporters. Then, Rebecca Lawson, a local attorney, spoke up. "My brother's law firm specializes in ADA compliance," she said. "Barbara's actions aren't just unethical, they're likely illegal. The Fair Housing Act and ADA both have protections against this kind of discrimination." As they spoke, the front door opened, and Mr. Wilson, Jacob's bus driver, stepped inside, looking slightly nervous. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," he said. "I heard what happened this morning." I gestured for him to sit. "We're gathering evidence against Barbara. Then you'll want to see this." He pulled a USB drive from his pocket and handed it to me. "What's on it?" *** security footage from the bus, *** every morning for the past month. It shows there's no actual traffic disruption. In fact, most mornings, not a single car even passes while Jacob boards." The room went silent. But the biggest shock came from Mark Delgado, our normally quiet neighbor, who had been making phone calls in the corner. He set his phone down and looked at us grimly. "Barbara filed her official candidacy for city council yesterday." The room erupted. "She's not just targeting Jacob," Mark continued. "She's building a political platform around eliminating accessibility regulations. Her campaign website just went live." He turned his tablet around. There, in bold letters, was Barbara's campaign slogan ***. Reducing regulatory burdens on our communities. One bullet point stood out like a flashing red warning sign. Streamlining transportation requirements and reducing costly accommodation mandates. Barbara was using my son as a political prop. For a moment, rage blurred my vision. Then Jacob, who had been silent the whole time, quietly spoke up. "I've been researching city council campaign finance laws," he said, scrolling through a document on his tablet. "HOA funds can't legally be used for campaign purposes. Has anyone checked the HOA's financial records?" The room fell completely still. We all stared at Jacob. He wasn't just a kid being pushed around anymore. He was about to become Barbara's biggest problem. By the time we arrived at the community center that evening, the parking lot was nearly full. Word had spread fast. Neighbors who had never bothered to show up for HOA meetings were suddenly very interested in tonight's agenda. The tension in the air was thick, a current of quiet conversations and exchanged glances that all carried the same undercurrent: something was about to happen. Barbara sat at the head of the room, her campaign assistant hovering beside her, whispering something in her ear. She nodded stiffly, her face an unreadable mask of practiced authority, but there was an edge to her, a slight stiffness in the way she clutched her pen, the way her eyes flicked around the room as if gauging the level of control she still had. At exactly 7 o'clock, she stood and tapped the microphone. "This meeting will come to order," she announced, her voice smooth, rehearsed. "We have an urgent neighborhood matter to address." I expected her to ease into it, but instead, she jumped straight for the throat. With a press of a button, a large projection screen behind her lit up with a slide presentation titled, "Maintaining Community Standards." The first image was a carefully curated photo of the neighborhood: pristine lawns, symmetrical hedges, wide, clear streets. Then, with a dramatic click, the screen changed. A still shot of Jacob's bus, the ramp extended. His wheelchair mid-boarding. I heard the sharp intake of breath from several neighbors. "Our neighborhood has become known for its exemplary community management," Barbara continued, clicking through slides that showed immaculately staged homes, "which is why I have been asked to bring my leadership to a larger platform." Another click. The same photo of Jacob's bus appeared again. This time, zoomed in. "But unfortunately," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured regret, "certain ongoing disruptions threaten our community's reputation and smooth functioning." I shot up from my seat, but Barbara ignored me completely. "As you can see from our community survey," she continued, clicking to a color-coded bar graph that no one had ever seen before, "these daily transportation issues are a top concern for our residents. Which is why I am proposing a new HOA regulation restricting special transport accommodations in residential zones." My vision flashed red. Jacob, who had been quietly sitting beside me, trying to disappear into his chair, lowered his head. That's when Ellie Grant stood up. "Point of order," she called, her small frame somehow commanding the entire room's attention. Barbara's smile twitched. "This isn't a court, Mrs. Grant," she said, her voice clipped. Ellie raised a brow. "No, it's something far more important than that. It's our community." She nodded toward Mark Delgado, who sat at the tech table near the back. A second later, the projection screen flickered, and suddenly, Barbara's carefully staged slideshow disappeared. In its place, a video began to play. Barbara's voice filled the room. "Every single morning." The video was a composite of recordings from multiple angles, pieced together by the very neighbors Barbara had alienated. It showed everything: her harassment at the bus stop, her accusations, her whispered threat to me. "Your son's situation doesn't fit the neighborhood image I need for my campaign." A stunned silence rippled through the room. Barbara's expression froze. Then, before she could recover, Tom Whitaker stood. "I've been reviewing our HOA financial records," he announced. "And I found something interesting." The screen shifted again, revealing a list of transactions. Barbara's name. Her personal consulting firm. $75,000 in community outreach funds. Gasps rippled through the crowd. These funds, Tom continued, were earmarked for community accessibility improvements. Instead, They were redirected to Barbara's company, ***, and appear to have been used for her campaign, ***. Barbara's campaign assistant paled. "I think the homeowners here deserve to know," Ellie said, her voice sharp with authority, "that their HOA fees have been funding Barbara's political ambitions." A roar of outrage erupted. Barbara shot up from her seat. "You don't understand." "No," a voice interrupted. A familiar, steady voice. "Jacob." The room fell silent. He wheeled himself forward, his hands gripping the rims tightly, his face set with determination. "I'm not a political prop," he said. "I'm not an obstacle. I'm a citizen. I have a right to be here." Barbara opened her mouth, but Jacob wasn't finished. "What you're doing isn't leadership. It's discrimination." His voice wavered for just a second before growing stronger. "And using people like me as a campaign strategy doesn't make you a leader. It makes you exactly the kind of person we need protection from." A heavy, crushing silence followed. Then, slowly, one person began to clap. Then another. Until the entire room was on its feet. Barbara's face crumbled. She saw it now, the shift. She had lost them. Even her most loyal supporters were stepping away, looking at her like they were seeing her for the first time. Then, from the back of the room, a deep voice spoke. "Ma'am," said Officer Brian Carter, stepping forward. "I need to speak with you regarding the misappropriation of HOA funds." Barbara spun to face him, shaking her head. "This is a political witch hunt." "No," Rick Coleman, the HOA vice president, said firmly, "this is accountability." The vote wasn't even close. Barbara was removed as HOA president. And as she was escorted from the room, ranting about political sabotage, the neighborhood erupted into cheers. Jacob, sitting beside me, turned his head slightly, watching her go. For the first time since this all began, I saw something new in his expression. Not fear. Not exhaustion. Strength. The aftermath of Barbara's downfall was felt almost immediately. By the following morning, her campaign website had quietly disappeared, her carefully curated, perfect community image shattered beyond repair. The local paper ran a story exposing her misuse of HOA funds, and within days, her political donors had pulled their support. The City Ethics Committee opened an investigation into her financial misconduct, and without the backing she had counted on, her dream of a city council seat collapsed overnight. But the real change happened closer to home. At the next HOA meeting, this time held without intimidation or hidden agendas, Rick Coleman was elected interim president. His first official act was to create an accessibility and inclusion committee, and to no one's surprise, he invited Jacob to be a founding member. For the first time in our neighborhood's history, the people being discussed actually had a seat at the table. Then came the decision from the school transportation board. Not only was Jacob's specialized bus service reinstated, but after seeing the overwhelming support from the community, they voted to expand similar accommodations for other students in need. What had once been a battle over a single wheelchair lift had turned into a district-wide accessibility initiative. But what truly surprised me wasn't the policies or the committee meetings. It was the neighbors themselves. The same people who once averted their eyes when Barbara harassed us were now actively stepping up. If Jacob's wheelchair ever malfunctioned or if he needed extra time boarding the bus, someone was there, a watchful presence, a supportive hand. No one had to be asked. One morning, as Jacob waited for the bus, I noticed something different. The neighbors were standing outside, not out of curiosity, but in quiet solidarity. Some waved. Some offered a thumbs up. They weren't just passively watching anymore. They were present. And for the first time in a long time, Jacob didn't look like he was trying to shrink into himself. Later that week, he was invited to speak at a local elementary school about disability awareness. Standing in front of a room full of wide-eyed kids, he shared his story, not as a victim, but as an advocate. He ended his talk with a simple, powerful statement. The only real disability is when people build ramps in their minds instead of in their communities. It was a lesson far more important than anything in their textbooks. Watching him that day, I realized something profound. What Barbara had tried to destroy wasn't just Jacob's ability to board a school bus. She had tried to break his spirit, to convince him he didn't belong. But instead, she had done the opposite. She had helped him find his voice. Because in the end, it took just one person's cruelty to reveal the kindness of an entire community. So I'll ask you this, have you ever faced discrimination disguised as rules and regulations? How did you fight back? Share your story below, because sometimes, standing up to a Karen isn't just about fighting injustice, it's about showing the world what true leadership looks like.